Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Five. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a young girl with a hidden talent, a fancy restaurant in Savannah, Georgia, and an ordinary night in April that turned out to change a life forever. This story took place last year in a candlelit space with the clinking of silverware and a hum of laughter from the diners. Our main character is named Jada, a quiet waitress with a heart full of music and a dream that never faded. Now, let's dive into the story. Jada wasn't someone who stood out in a crowd, but there was a quiet light about her, the light of someone who never gives up on their dream. She worked hard every night, smiling at the customers, but when no one was watching, her hands would find their way to the piano keys in the hidden corner of the restaurant, where her true heart would rise. Jada never chose La Fontaine for the salary or flexible hours. She chose it for one reason only: the grand piano, quietly sitting in a corner of the room, covered in a thin layer of dust and occasionally used as decoration, nothing more. To others, it was just an aesthetic detail, but for Jada, it was the bridge between her busy present and the childhood dream she had never let go of. Growing up in a small coastal town in South Carolina, Jada lived with her grandmother, a former music teacher with silver hair and a voice as soft as clouds. She was the first person to teach Jada how to feel music with her heart, not just her ears. The old upright piano in the living room was a family heirloom where Jada spent hours as a child practicing, from children's songs to the complex preludes of Chopin she found in old music books from the thrift store down the street. But like many who carry big dreams in a world full of pressures, Jada had to set aside her passion as she grew older. After her grandmother passed away, she moved to Savannah to start a new life. She worked day and night to pay bills, rent a place, and send money back to her younger brother, who was still in college. Life didn't offer her many choices, but every night, as she walked into the restaurant and passed by the familiar grand piano, a part of her heart felt awakened. Jada's co-workers knew she played the piano. Sometimes they would hear dreamy music coming from the side room during the rare moments she sat at the keys during her breaks. But no one knew that for her, music wasn't just a talent. It was her faith, the one thing that kept her smiling through exhausting shifts and unfulfilled dreams. And on that fateful night, when Victor Sterling walked into the restaurant, Jada had no idea that her dream was about to be awakened in a way she never expected. Victor Sterling entered La Fontaine as if he owned the place. With his perfectly tailored suit, polished leather shoes, and a smug half-smile, he didn't need an introduction. Everyone knew who he was. A well-known real estate investor, featured in financial magazines with the title The Golden Man of the Harbor. But Victor's fame wasn't just from his wealth. It also came from the way he relished attention by putting others down. For him, every evening was a stage, and anyone unlucky enough to fall under his gaze would become a prop in his entertainment. Jada took Victor's table calmly, unaware that she had become the target. When his eyes first scanned her, they didn't carry the usual polite gaze of a diner, but rather a scrutinizing look, almost as if he were appraising the worth of a piece of decor, not a human being. Jada, like every night, tried to maintain a professional smile, taking orders, serving drinks, and stepping back into her role, the invisible server in the fake glow of people like Victor. But Victor didn't just want service. He wanted a performance. When he found out Jada played the piano, information whispered from another server, his eyes lit up like someone who just discovered a new form of entertainment. In a quiet moment between courses, Victor spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Ms. Jada, I hear you're an artist. Why don't you treat us to a song?" The restaurant went silent. Jada stood frozen, the water tray in her hand wobbling slightly. She had never been asked to perform in the middle of a busy night, let alone in such a mocking, suggestive way. Victor leaned back in his chair, his half-smile growing wider. He didn't want to hear music. He wanted to see someone like her flounder, make a mistake, and become a spectacle in the midst of an elegant evening. But what Victor didn't realize was that he had just knocked on a dream that had been sleeping, and Jada was about to awaken it with something no one in the room could ignore. True talent. The entire restaurant fell silent as Jada set the water tray down, her gaze lingering on the grand piano in the corner of the room. The piano she had only dared to sit next to outside of working hours, never once touching it in front of the guests. The soft golden light spilled down like moonlight over an old dream. She knew that Victor Sterling didn't truly want to hear music. He wanted a public humiliation. But Jada also knew that if she turned away, if she bowed her head, her dream would slip back into slumber once again. "All right," she said, her voice soft but ringing through the silence like the sound of a crystal bell striking stone. "If the gentleman wants music, then I will play." Victor smirked, and a few chuckles echoed from his table. But Jada didn't look at them anymore. She strode toward the piano as if returning home after a long journey. Sitting down, she placed her fingers on the keys, cold, familiar, like the embrace of a loved one. No sheet music, no introduction. Jada began playing the first few notes, a classic jazz ballad her aunt had taught her. The sound was light as mist, weaving through the crystal glasses, through every breath held in the room. At first, only a few people looked up, but soon the entire room seemed to be drawn into the melody. Jada's hands danced over the keys, soft, natural, yet carrying an unusual weight. Each note was not just sound, but a story, about a little girl by the old piano, about the days spent struggling to nurture a dream, about the yearning to be seen as a true artist. The music swelled, dramatic, then fell like a stream flowing over a rocky cliff, clear and strong. The whole restaurant remained still. Victor Sterling, who had always controlled the room, was now just a motionless spectator, his hand gripping his wine glass, unaware. When Jada let go of the final note, a silence filled the space. Then, as if breaking open, the entire room erupted in applause like a downpour of rain. No one saw her as a waitress anymore. They had just witnessed a true artist. And Victor? He no longer smiled. The applause seemed to last forever, echoing throughout the elegant space of La Fontaine like a symphony honoring Jada. Not the waitress in a white shirt, but the artist who had made the hearts of everyone in the room stand still. Jada rose from the piano bench, slightly bowing her head in thanks, her eyes shining, but her gaze steady, as if she had just walked through an important door in her life. The diners continued to praise her as she returned to her station. "You should perform at the theater," an older woman whispered. "Thank you for this wonderful evening." Another gently touched her arm. "You made me believe in dreams again." Jada simply smiled, her heart still resonating with the notes she had just played. However, not everyone accepted this transformation so easily. Victor Sterling remained seated at his table, his gaze a mix of discomfort and confusion. He clapped, slowly, half-heartedly, as if trying to salvage a bit of his dignity. When Jada came over to bring the check, he looked up and gave a forced smile. "I have to admit," he said, his tone less arrogant, "true talent can come from unexpected places." Jada didn't respond immediately. She looked him straight in the eye, her gaze no longer shy. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "Talent doesn't discriminate by background. What matters is whether people know how to respect it." Victor fell silent. One of his companions, a younger man looking less flashy than the others, smiled at Jada. "You played beautifully. Thank you for sharing that with us." She nodded, her smile this time truly warm. Not because of the compliment, but because, finally, after months of silence, her dream had been heard, and more importantly, recognized. Even if it was just for one night, that was a moment no one could take away from Jada. After Victor and his group quietly left the restaurant, no more loud laughter, no more the grandiose presence that had once taken over the space. Jada stood for a moment, watching them through the glass, not to gloat, but to truly take in that small moment, the moment when the silence of someone who had once looked down on her became the clearest sign of her victory. That night, when the restaurant closed, Jada helped with the cleanup as usual, but there was something different. Everyone looked at her differently, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with respect. Her close colleague, the one who would often refill her water when she was busy, softly said, "Jada, tonight you made us all proud." Jada smiled, her eyes brighter than ever. When she left the restaurant, her tips that night were higher than usual. Clearly, those who witnessed her performance didn't just applaud with their hands, but with genuine recognition. And tucked between the receipts was a business card bearing the name of a stranger, Malcolm Dean, music producer, Nashville. On the back was a short handwritten note. "Call me when you're ready. You've got something special." Jada stood under the streetlights, gently gripping the business card as if it were a key. No, she wasn't delusional. She knew a business card didn't equal instant success. But it was the first time in many years that a door had opened, not because of luck, but because of her talent and courage. That night, in the small room she rented near the docks, Jada sat beside the old upright piano, the same piano that had accompanied her through the quiet days. Her fingers lightly brushed over the keys, not to practice, but to give thanks. Thankful for the dream that had never died, and thankful for herself, for daring to stand up, even with nothing but a piece of music and belief. The next morning, Jada woke up in her small room with the sunlight gently streaming through the window. On the table, Malcolm Dean's business card, the music producer from Nashville, still lay there, a reminder that last night wasn't a dream. She picked up the card, gently running her fingers along its edges as if she were feeling a future that had just begun to touch her hand. Her heart raced, but within her there was no longer the doubt that once clouded her thoughts, only the calm of someone who had just reclaimed a dream that once felt so far out of reach. She took a deep breath, then picked up her phone and dialed the number. "Hello, Mr. Dean. she said, her voice still trembling slightly. "This is Jada, the pianist from last night at La Fontaine. I'm ready." On the other end of the line, Malcolm couldn't hide his excitement. "I was hoping you'd call. I've seen many performances, but there was something in the way you played. It made the whole room stop and listen. I can't promise anything big, but I believe you deserve a chance." He invited her to Nashville to record a demo, to see where your music can go. It wasn't a golden ticket. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar contract. But for Jada, it was the first time anyone in the industry had reached not out of pity, not to mock her, but because they truly believed in her talent. After hanging up, Jada sat quietly for a moment. Then she turned to her old upright piano. Her fingers gently touched the keys, not to practice but to say thank you, with gratitude to her grandmother, to the days gone by, and to herself. Because the night before, she hadn't just stood up for her passion. She had faced the dismissive gazes, overcome them, and silenced them with the only language that no one could disregard: music. Now she was ready to move forward, not just as a waitress who could play the piano, but as a true artist, writing the first chapter of her own journey. A few weeks later, Jada walked into the small studio in Nashville with a heart calmer than ever. The demo was recorded on an emotional morning. She wasn't trying to prove anything, simply telling her story through music. And strangely enough this time, no one forced her onto a stage, no dismissive glances, no challenges that twisted her self-worth, just respect and listening. When she left the studio, Jada didn't know what the future would hold, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned that her value wasn't in fame or status, but in daring to live true to her passion. The lesson from Jada's story is simple. Never let anyone decide your limits. When you stand up for yourself, the whole world will have to listen.